All right, welcome class to our week 14 presentation. We are continuing to talk about persuasive essays. So we're going to talk about how to approach the audience with your persuasive voice. So let's go ahead and get started. As a reminder, the goal of persuasive writing is to convince your audience that your point is more valid than another point. So you're trying to let the audience know that what you are saying is valid, is correct, is the right way to go with things, more than somebody else's point of view. And oftentimes with persuasive writing, you're trying to get the audience to do something about it, to actually take an action. So Aristotle, which is very exciting, Aristotle broke this up into 3 different types of appeals, and this is ethos, pathos, and logos, not to be confused with Athos, Porthos, and Aramis from Three Musketeers, although that's what I think about when I look at these. And you can actually kind of see some correlations in terms of personality types. So if you're wanting to memorize ethos, pathos, and logos, perhaps you can do a little study on the Three Musketeers. But let's talk about each of those and how they apply to persuasive writing. So ethos is where you are establishing the credibility of the writer, and it's often called the ethical appeal. But I want you to keep in mind that this is not about the audience's ethics. It's really about yourself as the writer and how you are credible as an authority or as someone worth listening to about your topic. So you're creating an atmosphere in which the audience will respect you and want to listen to you in some way. So if you think back to the reading for this week, Jerry Garibaldi's article, How the Schools Shortchange Boys, it starts off by sharing that Garibaldi is a teacher, that he worked in the movie business, so he shares a little bit about his own personal experience, his take as an English teacher in a world of female English teachers. So that element of his own experience in the professional world helps to establish credibility as the writer of the article. And so that would fall along the lines of the ethos. Now, Aristotle looks at ethos through 3 different lenses. So this is virtue, practical wisdom, and selflessness. So if you establish your virtue as your credibility, that would be your values. And I think values are really important in terms of when you're looking at the type of controversial issues that we're discussing for the persuasive paper. I think about, we look at gay marriage as one of the topics for discussion in last week's discussion board. And a lot of people brought up their own personal values, their own personal beliefs. And that is an element in which you are establishing your virtue, which is ethos, and how your virtue relates to the values of the audience. So you give examples of your values, you state your values, and you relate those things to the audience, and that's an establishment of ethos. Ethos can also come into line when you look at practical wisdom. So though you may not be considered an expert, you might have practical experience that is beneficial to others. Sharing your point of view and your own life experience would be practical wisdom. So like Garibaldi's article, he shares that he is a teacher, and so his classroom experience, his experience with boys in the classroom, and how that relates to the topic of the article, that's practical wisdom. You can also show your own flexibility, your own adaptability in terms of coming together. So you can look at, for instance, if you're looking at a particular controversial issue, you can share with the audience the 2 extremes of the topic and then show how you're somewhere in the middle. And so you can compromise and you can come together for a common goal. And that's about establishing credibility with the audience. And last week we talked a bit about approaching a hostile audience, and that establishing common ground is an important step in approaching that hostile audience. And that's all part of ethos. And also Aristotle talks about selflessness being an element of ethos in persuasive writing. And that's where you share the struggles that you have had with the issue. Not necessarily saying that you've struggled with that issue, like whether or not you, looking at the topics that we've discussed, that maybe you've been in an interracial relationship. No, that's not what we're talking about. Establishing your struggle with determining your viewpoint on the topic. So sharing those personal elements that say, hey, I've thought about this issue and I've been on both sides of the fence and I have looked at the issue from many different perspectives, and this is the struggle that I have with it. And so speaking plainly and even asking the audience to come on board with you and help you in your struggle with coming up with your point of view. So asking questions, bringing them alongside you, and establishing that kind of relationship with the audience is all part of ethos. Another persuasive element is pathos, and this is where you create a personal connection with the reader. So it's a little bit different than ethos because it's often thought of as an emotional appeal. This is where you get the reader to sympathize or empathize with your topic. This is where you share the sob stories, where you share those personal experiences that get people really emotionally involved with your topic. This happens a lot with, for instance, the abortion issue recently. So we have recently seen these videos that have come out about Planned Parenthood, and there are all these videos about actual abortions that have been done and that kind of stuff. And those are emotional appeals because they are heart-wrenching videos that people watch, and it's very difficult to deal with. And so that's a way that you can approach something with an emotion. And emotional appeals are definitely part of persuasive writing. So, for instance, in the other article that we're reading in class, the Doug Anglin's A War Against Boys, he talks about Doug Anglin in the article by Michael Kimmel. And that story at the beginning where he talks about Doug and how he is suing the school for gender discrimination, basically, that's a story that the audience can connect to and get that emotional appeal. Now, it's not a sob story, but it's something that is personal and relatable. So Aristotle with pathos has a way in which you can approach the emotional appeal. Think about emotions provoke motion. That's the idea. So there's different ways that you can do that. One is to stimulate emotion. So you want to create emotion in your audience. So you look for their beliefs and then you amplify them. You tell stories to develop a sense of suspense, or you can speak simply and in a relatable way, a personal tone, because the audience might distrust fancy language. Or you might want to calm an emotion. So you have a very controversial issue that's a hot topic and you want to bring the emotion down. So you could become passive in your verbs, very deliberately avoiding blame. You can overplay your own emotion. You can use humor, and that can calm things down. You also, when trying to create an emotional appeal, you might create rapport with the audience. So mirror the audience's language, mirror the audience's viewpoint, include them in your thinking. We all know, like you, I've found, I'm sure there's not a person here who hasn't had some point. So creating that common ground language can create rapport with the audience. Don't announce your emotions like, I feel bad. That's something that people are going to resist. Instead, show them the emotion. Then think about the question, is it a task or relationship? Where does the audience like to invest their feelings? So for instance, scientists, if your audience are scientists, tend to invest in research and results. Nurses in the welfare of their patients. business in the bottom line, and so on. So if you look at the emotional examples of your audience's viewpoints and your audience's approach, so you guys as students, as the audience, myself as a teacher, what do they respond to? Do they respond to people? Do they respond to helping others? What is it their response is? And then move your writing along that lines. And finally, the third type of persuasive appeal is logos. And this is where you persuade by the use of reasoning. And I think that this might be the most important appeal that you will make in persuasive writing, because this is where you really incorporate research, you incorporate examples, reason, claims, and this is where you support with evidence. It's logical. It's where you're using reasoning and logic to prove a point. And both of the works that we read this week use these a lot. You could include statistics, facts, review research that has been done, test the research against other findings. I would say that the second article that we read is actually more along the lines of logos. We see a lot more statistics drawn up in the second article. We see a lot more numbers in the development of male and female productivity in school. We see a lot of numbers involved with that, a lot of logic, a lot of examples. When the first article draws more on experience than the second article. So in terms of which one is more effective, look at, is it only trying to base things on emotion? Is it only basing things on experience, or does it draw on all three? Do we have a clear logical example, logical reasoning behind the argument, or is all just emotion? And I think that it's important that when we look at persuasive writing, we try to hit on all three of these elements, because yes, even though we could say numbers until we're blue in the face, but if people don't have that emotional connection to your topic, you're not going to get them to do anything about it. So it is important to create emotion. It is important to share your own credibility as a writer. And I would say it's just as important to include research and to include reasoning and facts and statistics and logic. Those are all important elements. And by balancing the three things together in your persuasive paper, you're going to have a more effective, well-rounded argument. So for this one, for logos, at the heart of it is argument. So the point of it is to argue. And if you look at it in terms of your argument for your paper, it's you think that something should happen or that something is true, and you're trying to convince an audience that such and such should happen or that such and such is true. This is what is right. That's your case, right? So that's your point of view, your case. X should happen, or X is true. Interracial marriage is a right, or gay marriage is wrong. These are points of view that people express, and that's the case that you're going to try to make in your persuasive writing. And to do that, you look at these different structures. So it could be because X is Y, is a Y. So the definition. So sharing a definition is a way of logical logos reasoning. You can share cause and effect. X will cause Y. X has a desired consequence of Y. So X is like Y. So each of these types of elements here, the because part of the case, is a way to present your argument, a structure that you can use. You can use these interchangeably throughout your paper, but definition, cause and effect, antecedent consequence, resemblance, these are all ways to show examples, logic, reasoning, statistics, facts. Those are all ways to address a topic in order to get a response from your audience. So when you're thinking about organizing your paper, because ultimately by the end of this week, you should be turning in your first draft. right? The 22nd. So you should be turning in your first draft by the end of this week, so we can move into getting feedback from your classmates during the Thanksgiving holiday. And when you think about organizing your ideas, think about your audience. Does your audience mostly agree with you already? Does your audience not agree with you at all? Think about what you've gotten feedback in terms of the ideas you've read from your classmates so far. And so when you approach the audience, will it be more effective to share facts first or to share a personal experience? Do you need to establish your credibility as a writer before you move into anything else? So which appeal is going to be the strongest? Should it go at the beginning? Should you start off with your strongest point and then move on to the others? Or should you end with the strong point to hit it home? Is your audience hostile? And think about the topics we talked about last week in terms of approaching a hostile audience. So when you start to organize your paper, the reaction of your audience is going to be very important. And think about the structure. Would it be important at the beginning to establish your credibility, to go into that part of persuasive, or would an emotional appeal or would facts be more important during that time when you start to introduce your case? Or would it be better to end the paper with an emotional appeal where you shared all the facts, all the logic, all the reasoning, and then you want to hook them with that final emotional appeal? So when you look at organization, there's not one way to do it with persuasive writing, but you can use each of these in order to create the response that you want from an argument paper. And that is really ultimately to get your audience to be on your side. Whatever your point of view that you want the audience to agree with you, or you want the audience to do something about it. And the way in which you approach your paper using logos, ethos, pathos, using each of those elements, the emotional appeal, the logical appeal, the ethical appeal, using those things will help you move forward and connect to the audience on multiple levels. And that's really what we want to be able to do, because we all think on multiple levels, and we can then be persuaded by hitting on each of these points. So another way to look at organization is called the Toolman method, and this is where we logically progress through ideas. And so this is just an example of organization. You don't have to use it this way, but I just thought it'd be good to look over. So you would start your paper with your claim. So that's that overall thesis statement. We want to see what your point of view is, why you think that way, and how you want to prove it to your audience. Then share data, so the evidence gathered to support the claim. Here's the claim, here's the data. Then the warrant. The warrant is kind of also thought of as a bridge. It's the explanation of why or how the data supports your claim. So you have a claim, you share the data, and then you go back to the claim. This might remind you of sandwiching a bit from week 7, but share the claim, share the data, go back and explain why that data proves your claim. Then you would look at adding backing, which is also called foundation, and this is additional logic or reasoning that might be necessary to support the warrant. So it's a further information to share that the data proves your point. Counterclaim is when a claim negates or disagrees with a thesis, so sharing the other point of view. So it's okay to share with your audience what the opposite point of view is. But the point would be that it's not just to share it, that this is what other people think, but don't just share it, but actually negate it. So you're going to share the counterclaim and then rebut the counterclaim. So share evidence that negates or disagrees with the counterclaim. So here's what other people believe, and this is why that's an incorrect belief. So this is a method in which you can organize your paper, and it can go over and over again. So let's look at an example. So let's say the claim is that hybrid cars are an effective strategy to fight pollution. The data would be driving a private car is a typical citizen's most air polluting activity. So when we drive, that's what we pollute the most with. So the warrant is because cars are the largest source of private as opposed to industrial produced air pollution, switching to hybrid cars should have an impact on fighting pollution. So it's a logic. We're sharing some reasoning, some why the data is going to support the claim, which is that we should all have hybrid cars. And then you move on to the next data. Each vehicle produced is going to stay on the road for roughly 12 to 15 years. That's data. This is facts. And then a warrant, evidence on why that supports the claim. Cars generally have a long lifespan, meaning that a decision to switch to a hybrid car will make a long-term impact on pollution levels. Data 3. You see, we're going data, warrant, and they're all working to support the overall claim. And then we move into counterclaim. Instead of focusing on cars, which still encourages a culture of driving, even if it cuts down on pollution, the nation should focus on building and encouraging the use of mass transit systems. So that's an opposing viewpoint. And so the rebuttal would be, while mass transit is an environmentally sound idea that should be encouraged, it is not feasible in many rural and suburban areas or for people who must commute to work. Thus, hybrid cars are a better solution for much of the nation's population. So you see that it's not saying that, okay, this counterclaim is totally wrong. It's saying that what my solution is in my paper is a better solution than what the counterclaim was. So with that, just some ideas on how to organize your persuasion. What kind of appeals do we look at? An emotional appeal, an ethical appeal, and a logical appeal. And then how can we organize, consider your audience, support your claims with evidence. Don't be afraid to address the opposition as long as you can then show how that opposition is incorrect. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to send them my way. But otherwise, have a wonderful week. I look forward to seeing your research and your topic ideas for the persuasive paper in the discussion board this week. If you have any questions, like I said, feel free to send them my way. Otherwise, we will see you in the discussion board. Have a great week. Bye.